At 3:22 a.m., nearly 300 feet below the lightless waters of the Norwegian Sea, a Russian commander allowed himself a brief moment of hard-earned confidence. His $1.5 billion Yasin M submarine was moving in ultra-quiet mode and had already slipped past the outer defensive ring of the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group. It was a bold move, one aimed straight at NATO's most sensitive pressure point. But about 200 meters away, an American P-8 Poseidon released a small sonobuoy directly into the submarine's projected path. That compact device, costing only a fraction of the submarine itself, picked up a faint but unmistakable shift in frequency, the digital fingerprint of one of Moscow's most closely guarded naval assets. Inside the combat center of a U.S. Arleigh Burke destroyer, the message spread instantly across the network. 3 Russian submarines had entered the area. In that moment, one thing became clear. Disappearing into the deep is no longer as easy as it once was, and the next 48 hours would become an intense test of endurance, pressure, and precision for the Russian crews. This was far more than a routine naval exercise. It was NATO's dynamic mariner operation in the Norwegian Sea, a large-scale multinational display of readiness built to rehearse the defense of the alliance's northern flank. At the center of that mission was the strategically vital GIUK gap, the narrow corridor between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom that acts as the gateway to the North Atlantic. The message behind the exercise was unmistakable. Russian submarines would not be allowed to dominate that passage. Leading the operation was the USS Gerald R. Ford, America's $13 billion nuclear-powered supercarrier, on its first fully combat-ready deployment in the demanding deep-water acoustic conditions near the Arctic Circle. Around it sailed a powerful escort force made up of American, British, Norwegian, and Canadian warships. For Moscow, the Ford's presence was more than symbolic. It signaled that the Atlantic, once viewed as a reliable strategic space for submarine operations and missile patrol routes, was now under close and constant watch. The stakes were enormous. If Russia managed to position 3 attack submarines inside the carrier group's protective screen, 2 Yasin M guided missile submarines, and 1 older Akula-class boat, it would deal a serious blow to NATO's confidence and transform a major show of unity into a strategic embarrassment. Russia's goal went beyond collecting acoustic data. It was about challenging sea control, testing NATO's reactions, and sending a message across Europe that Russian naval power could still shape events far beyond its own coastline. Moscow had invested billions in the belief that its newest submarines were quiet enough, deep enough, and fast enough to slip through unseen. What stood in their way, however, was a tightly connected multi-domain detection network, a seamless combination of American and Allied technology built not only to track elusive underwater targets, but to expose them with absolute clarity. So the real question is this: can a $1.5 billion Russian submarine still remain hidden against a defense network refined through 75 years of anti-submarine warfare experience? Share your thoughts in the comments. Can the near-silent design of a Yasin M still outmatch the digital accuracy of a fully integrated Aegis-backed tracking system? As the confrontation unfolded, the opposing force had been assembled for maximum stealth and strategic impact. It included 3 of the Russian Navy's most valued deep-diving submarines, deployed from the Northern Fleet with a clear mission: break through the NATO formation and prove they still mattered in a rapidly changing naval battlefield. At the center of that threat were the 2 Yasin M-class boats, the most dangerous and capable platforms in the group. At 130 meters long, with a submerged displacement of 13,800 tons and an estimated crush depth close to 600 meters, these submarines represent some of Russia's most advanced nuclear-powered attack platforms. Operating at depths like that gives them a major tactical advantage and makes interception dramatically more difficult. Volkov's K-560 was built as a guided missile heavyweight designed with one mission in mind: threatening high-value naval targets. Its main striking power came from 32 vertical launch cells, loaded with a combination of caliber cruise missiles capable of reaching targets up to 1,500 miles away, and Onyx supersonic anti-ship missiles that can close in at speeds approaching Mach 2.5. A successful launch from one of these submarines would create a crisis of the highest order for the United States. Their approach relied on a classic Cold War playbook: use the deep thermal layers of the Norwegian basin and the unstable surface conditions above to conceal movement, then quietly shadow the American formation with the help of the massive MGK-600 Irtish Amphora spherical bow sonar array, a system built to detect even the faintest sound across vast stretches of ocean. Russian commanders were operating under a dangerous sense of confidence. They believed their newest pump jet propulsion system, combined with disciplined navigation, made the submarines nearly impossible to detect. In their view, these boats were drifting through the sea like true acoustic shadows. But that assumption overlooked one critical reality. NATO was no longer relying on isolated ships and delayed analysis. It was operating as one fully connected surveillance web, turning the Norwegian Sea into a coordinated and constantly listening detection zone. That miscalculation was about to hand NATO an enormous intelligence advantage. The response from the Gerald R. Ford Strike Group and its allied escorts was immediate, coordinated, and executed with remarkable speed. At the center of the anti-submarine effort was the U.S. Navy's P-8A Poseidon, a modified Boeing 737 and one of the most capable maritime patrol aircraft in service today. With the ability to remain on station for more than 10 hours and scan up to 120,000 square miles in a single mission, the P-8 was built for exactly this kind of hunt. Once the initial Russian contact was detected, the aircraft began deploying a layered field of passive and directional active sonobuoys. These floating sensors spread across the water in a wide pattern, forming an invisible tracking grid. Every signal they picked up, including the precise time difference of arrival from the submarine's hull noise, was processed and transmitted through the secure Link 16 network to nearby NATO warships. That data flowed instantly to every major surface combatant in the area. The USS Arleigh Burke, DDG-51, the British frigate HMS Northumberland, F238, and the Norwegian frigate HNOMS Fridtjof Nansen, F310. The Arleigh Burke then became the main pressure point in the operation. Its AN/SQS-53C hull-mounted sonar, powerful enough to project a concentrated acoustic beam across long distances, was shifted into high-power short-pulse mode. For the Russian crews, the effect would have been impossible to ignore. Every few seconds, another wave of intense sound rolled through the water, turning stealth into stress and forcing them to operate under constant pressure. At the same time, two MH-60R Seahawk helicopters, among the most versatile tools in modern naval aviation, were already in the air, moving toward the projected submarine positions at 160 knots. They lowered their AQS-22 dipping sonars precisely where the P-8 predicted the Russian submarines would pass. This was the full weight of modern multi-domain coordination, air, surface, and subsurface forces all operating as a single connected system, with the Aegis Combat Network serving as the central hub and giving every unit the same real-time picture of the underwater situation. Their mission was clear, not to destroy the submarines, but to pressure them acoustically and mentally until they gave away everything they were trying to hide. What followed over the next 48 hours was not a traditional battle. It became a contest of sound, endurance, tactics, and relentless psychological pressure. 4 hours after the first contact, Captain Boloff and the crews of the other two submarines understood the situation had turned against them. Once the AN/SQS-53C sonar aboard the Arleigh Burke started its repeated active pulses, the effect was impossible to ignore. The sound did not simply appear on instruments. It rolled through the hulls themselves, shaking deck plates and wearing down the nerves of everyone inside. For the crew of the K-560, the quiet world they had counted on was gone. In its place came a steady, punishing rhythm echoing through the submarine's compartments. It was a deliberate, non-lethal pressure tactic, a constant signal that NATO was tracking their depth, direction, and speed with remarkable accuracy. The Russian plan to remain hidden and wait for the right moment had effectively collapsed. They were no longer choosing the pace of the encounter. They were being guided by forces they could not shake. 12 hours in, the strain was becoming visible. The older Akula-class submarine, assigned as the supporting element, was beginning to lose coherence in its movements. It maneuvered aggressively in an effort to break away from the persistent presence of an MH-60R Seahawk that had remained overhead for more than 2 hours, continuously deploying directional active buoys into the water. That pressure forced the Russian captain into a damaging decision. He could either slow down to reduce noise and risk being contained, or increase speed to escape the immediate tracking pressure. He chose speed. That choice produced exactly the kind of acoustic spike NATO had been waiting for. The sudden increase in cavitation and propeller noise created a sharp, high-resolution signature. Even subtle mechanical irregularities, including the faint rhythmic wobble of a poorly aligned shaft, were picked up, recorded, and transmitted by the Seahawk's sensor operator through Link 16 to the Arleigh Burke's central system. In that instant, the submarine's acoustic identity was no longer a mystery. It had been captured, logged, and preserved as a lasting intelligence gain. By the 24-hour mark, the outcome was already taking shape. The three Russian submarines were no longer operating as a coordinated threat. They had become three separate, increasingly isolated contacts being pushed into a tightening containment zone formed by American, British, and Norwegian surface ships. the destroyer Arleigh Burke maintained pressure on one Yasen M boat. A British Type 23 frigate covered the second. Another American destroyer focused on the older Akula. And through all of it, the USS Gerald R. Ford, the central target of the entire encounter, never broke formation, never changed speed, and never altered course. For the Ford's 5,000 sailors, the Russian challenge never matured into a direct danger. What surrounded them was simply the steady proof that their defensive network was doing exactly what it had been built to do. The final turning point came when NATO forces, having fixed the submarines' positions with high confidence, began dropping training depth charges into the water roughly 500 meters from the Russian hulls. They were not intended to cause damage, but their effect was impossible to miss. The shock waves rolled through the water and thundered against the steel structures of the submarines. The message was unmistakable and delivered with absolute clarity. The hunt ended not with a blast, but with something far more revealing: withdrawal. After 48 hours of non-stop tracking, pressure, and sensory overload, the three Russian submarine commanders finally broke off the mission. Their crews were drained, morale was slipping, and they had been pushed into a kind of digital and acoustic pressure they were never fully prepared to handle. One by one, their fading signatures turned north, pulling back toward the relative safety of the Kola Peninsula. Their mission had failed in full. The USS Gerald R. Ford was never placed in real danger, suffered no disruption to its operations, and continued the exercise almost as if the entire episode had been nothing more than a background complication. But the real price for Russia was not fuel, and it was not equipment. It was information. During those 48 hours, NATO's network of P-8 Poseidons, MH-60R Seahawks, and surface ship sonar systems captured the acoustic profiles of three of Russia's most advanced attack submarines. Every important detail mattered. The exact harmonic pattern of the K-560's pump jet at low speed, the mechanical frequencies of the older Akula's onboard systems, even the faint signature of auxiliary equipment that normally hides beneath the ocean's noise. All of it was recorded, studied, and added to NATO's wider undersea tracking database. That changes everything. The next time these submarines put to sea, they may no longer be judged only by what they can do, but by how easily they can be recognized. Their advantage in stealth had been narrowed, not by one dramatic moment, but by a coordinated effort that exposed their underwater identity piece by piece. That was the deeper setback for Moscow. Some of its most closely guarded naval technology had been observed, catalogued, and understood by a multinational force working in complete coordination. On NATO's side, the mood was not celebratory. It was controlled, professional, and calm. No grand reaction, no dramatic victory scene, just a return to routine. No shots were fired, yet the strategic result was unmistakable. The operation sent a clear signal that the United States and its allies remain highly capable across the Atlantic, from the surface to the seabed, with a surveillance and response network that is constantly improving. The encounter in the Norwegian Sea stands as a sharp warning to any rival that still believes its most valuable assets can move unseen in the North Atlantic. In modern naval competition, especially in the cold and complex waters of the far north, stealth is no longer an all-or-nothing advantage. It is a limited and measurable edge, one that can shrink quickly when faced with a fully integrated detection network. That is where the Russian plan fell behind its time. It leaned too heavily on the idea that a single advanced platform, no matter how quiet or sophisticated, could overcome a larger alliance by operating alone and slipping through gaps in coordination. But NATO's advantage came from the opposite principle: connected warfare, where one sensor supports another, one gap is covered by the next layer, and every platform contributes to a single shared picture. In the end, a $1.5 billion submarine was challenged not by one ship alone, but by a synchronized system built across air, sea, and subsurface forces, a system in which even a relatively inexpensive sonobuoy could serve as the first link in a much larger chain. That chain worked with remarkable efficiency. Initial detection by a high-flying Poseidon, classification and localized tracking by an MH-60R Seahawk, sustained pressure from Allied frigates, and final control of the situation through the sonar reach of American destroyers. Each piece reinforced the next. Each platform made the whole network stronger. And that is what makes this kind of coordination so important. It is not only a defensive tool. It is a form of deterrence in itself. The message is straightforward. Any future attempt to challenge these critical sea lanes will not be answered by a single vessel acting alone, but by a layered and highly coordinated force with very little room for mistakes. Freedom of navigation, regional stability, and the protection of global trade depend on forces that can detect threats early, respond fast, and turn even the most secretive military assets into something far easier to track than their designers ever intended. Let us know in the comments. Do you think any country, including China with its growing navy, can match this level of multi-domain coordination and undersea tracking capability?